All right, this is our broadcast of terms 141 through 160.
Yep.
And Patrika's going to take it away from the
Okay.
beginning.
Turn 41. The Battle of Midway was a turning point for the war. Midway was a strategic area north of Hawaii where the Americans had broken the Japanese code, so they knew of an impending attack that was about to happen. They were able to catch the Japanese off guard due to the cracking of the code and destroyed 4 of their aircraft carriers, a cruiser, and about 250 planes.
Term 142 was Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world's first atomic bomb, Little Boy, was used in war on Hiroshima, an important Japanese military center. 3 days after Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki, forcing Japan to surrender. An estimated total of 200,000 deaths are believed to be a result of injuries and radiation. This number includes a majority of civilians, which brought on an ethical debate about the bombs afterwards.
Okay. The Yalta Conference. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met at the Black Sea resort in Yalta, which is near Russia. This was the second time during the war that a conference was held between them. Stalin wanted a harsh punishment for Germany after the war. Roosevelt agreed to his terms only if they split Germany into 4, and Stalin joined him to create the UN, and they all agreed.
The Dumbarton Oaks Conference occurred because the international mutual agreement on the need for a post-war organization to succeed the League of Nations. The conference took place in D.C. and led to the formation of the UN's organizational structure.
At the time, the UN was the biggest symbol of hope for the world and for world peace. About 50 nations and representatives met in San Francisco on April 25, 1945. About 2 months after, on June 26, 1945, the charter was signed by all the delegates, but soon after, the 2 supreme powers, Russia and the U.S., they were battling to see who was superior in the UN.
Mary Bethune was appointed by Truman to be a delegate on interracial relations at the San Francisco Conference. She was the only colored woman at the conference, and she is also known for opening Bethune-Cookman College, which was originally for African-American girls only.
The Potsdam Conference. The Big Three met for the final time near Berlin at Potsdam. Stalin did not keep his end of the bargain during the Yalta Conference deal, and he didn't have free elections like he promised everybody. And he banned Democratic parties from being allowed to be voted on, and U.S. didn't like that because it allowed the spread of communism.
Florida's involvement in World War II was mainly related to shipbuilding and agriculture. The government spent a total of $98 billion in Florida for the war effort, and there's a total of 172 military training centers. This increase in attention led to a 46% population rise between the years of 1940 and 1950.
Okay. The Nuremberg trials. Between 1945 to 1946, 24 of Hitler's trusted advisors were put on trial. The degrees of crime against humanity, crimes against peace, and war crimes. They were accused. They accused themselves, and they basically said we were only following orders, but they were still sentenced to death. 12 of them, and the rest were in prison for life. And they established the principle of individual responsibility. So you take responsibility for your actions.
The Iron Curtain refers to the division of Europe by the Soviets. This division ran through Germany and Austria and met with the Adriatic Sea. Communication and transportation across this border was limited due to the communist control of the region. When Stalin and the communist Eastern Europe heard of a speech given by Winston Churchill, he declared that Churchill wanted war.
Okay. The Truman Doctrine. Truman asked Congress for about $400 million to aid Greece and Turkey in their fight against communism. So this was the beginning of the containment policy. This was to stop the spread of communism in Europe, and this doctrine shifted American policy from detente to containment.
The Marshall Plan was a plan for the U.S. To fund the revival of Europe after World War II. In 4 years, 16 Western European countries got $13 billion in aid. Though this move was costly, it gained the U.S. allies and trading partners. Not to mention, this action stopped the spread of communism throughout Europe.
Okay. The Berlin Blockade. After the World War II, Berlin was split into 4 sections controlled by the Allies. The Soviets blocked all roads and railways from their section to the Western Allied section to split the Berlin in half. And the Allies started to airlift supplies for the residents because they were starving and didn't have any supplies because they were cut off from the rest of the country. And they flew about 200,000 flights in 1 year. And the Soviets saw that the blockade wasn't working, so they lifted the blockade within a year.
NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was formed on April 4th, 1949. 12 countries joined and agreed to militarily support any of the members if they were to come under attack. The US and Canada were the two North American countries in the organization, with 10 other Western European countries. By 1955, NATO kept 500,000 troops and thousands of planes and tanks ready at all times. This was the first military alliance for the US during their peacetime.
The Warsaw Pact. This was the Soviets' answer to Europe's NATO group. It was composed of Central and Eastern European countries that were communist at the time. And after the collapse of the USSR, the alliance was actually transformed into the CSTO. Yep.
The Korean War occurred between the Communist North and the Democratic South. The 38th parallel seemed to divide the peninsula in half, and it served as the final division of North and South after the war. The war began with the North attacking the South. The North pushed the South very far until the South was able to hold them off and began to push back. And the South pushed the North deep into their territory, and eventually they settled on an armistice, and the two were divided along the 38th parallel.
Okay. At the time, Truman was worried that the people in the U.S. government were communist, and he was afraid of the communist influence they would have on our government. So he created the Loyalty Review Board, and he didn't want the communist idea to spread throughout the government and to the public. So he was hunting them down and firing them and detaining them, and he just basically wanted to find out who was loyal and who was disloyal in the government to the U.S.
The term McCarthyism referred to the anti-communist paranoia that engulfed the 1950s. People began accusing many others of being communist without cause for doing so. Joseph McCarthy was a Republican senator from Wisconsin, and he was the first to really declare that communists were taking over the government. McCarthy was aware enough as to only accuse in Senate, where he was protected with legal immunity. McCarthy later died in 1957, 3 years after an unsuccessful accusation of the U.S. Army.
Okay. Eisenhower's doctrine. Eisenhower basically made a speech on the 5th of January 1957 concerning Middle East conflict. Under the doctrine, the Middle East countries like Egypt and Iran, they could request economic or military assistance from the U.S., and this was a response to the Soviets trying to enter Egypt unlawfully and invade their sovereignty.
In 1960, President Eisenhower granted the CIA permission to prepare for a secret invasion of Cuba. The intent was to disrupt the communist regime and to get Castro out of power. When Kennedy took office, he okayed the plan as well. The entire mission ended up being a total disaster, as none of the plans went as they were designed to. This major bust was a big embarrassment to Kennedy's presidency and to the U.S. foreign policy. The Bay of Pigs was ultimately an unsuccessful invasion.
And that's our terms.
That's all we have for today. Maya EOC 2K15.
Yeah.
It's Banana Pants.
Woo!